guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Kackie and welcome to video number 6 in my 12 Days of Mindfulness series. Guys, before you leave, don't forget to subscribe if you want to keep watching this series and beyond with me, and if you guys get something out of this, please pass it along, give it a thumbs up, comment down below, let me know what you guys think and start a conversation, and I hope that you guys are enjoying this series so far. So today we are going to be talking about a little thing called a samskara. It is a Sanskrit word and it has a lot of meanings kind of throughout history, but mainly what a samskara is a subtle impression of our past actions. I have been reading this book called The Untethered Soul, and while it's written incredibly simply, it's also super meditative and kind of heavy, and it talks a lot about this, but I'm going to get into why I kind of depart from the logic a little bit later in the video, but the author defines it in a set of kind of really simple examples. So we've all been someplace where you see something that triggers something else outside of context and sends you back to that place where you are emotionally back in a situation, good or bad, but you are now kind of occupying that because of something that you saw right here, right now that kind of like reminded you of it. And sometimes they can be really bad. I mean, we've all been on a date before and somebody that we're dating says something that reminds us of an ex, and we start kind of spiraling in our heads about that ex and how much they sucked and why we hated that one turn of phrase that they used or something like that, and then suddenly we realize we haven't been present in the conversation for a few minutes and that we have no idea what's going on, and now we're in a bad mood. And suffice it to say, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. That's just like an inconvenience, but sometimes these things can be kind of traumatic and make things sort of bubble up in really, really uncomfortable and harmful ways. And so the idea is to incorporate this into your mindfulness practice every day, to recognize these mental impressions from past actions and begin to process them in a healthy way so that they basically stop bothering you. And it sounds really hard, because it is really hard, but it's also incredibly freeing because you have the opportunity to process each of these impressions in either a good or bad way, and if you are to process them in a bad way, they just kind of get worse and you're feeding more of your attention to them. But if you process them in a really good way, they actually help you grow to a higher mental state, a better level of resilience, and a better sense of knowing yourself, and you start to just kind of like unload the baggage. So yes, they are annoying and they are kind of a problem, but they are also a huge opportunity to then become a better version of yourself, which is what this whole series is about. So the book basically says that when one of these things happens, okay, when you're, driving along and you see somebody who drives the same car as your ex or something like that, and it just like throws you into a tailspin or something like that. I keep giving relationship examples. It could be having to do with anything. But when one of these things happens, you are supposed to just let it go, okay? And that's what the guy who wrote this book says, and he's just like, this is your opportunity, like, don't give it your attention, just let it go. I have to disagree with that because that does not have a practical application. It's actually not possible. I have talked to many people about these things, my therapist included, and that's just not really how it works. I mean, I guess if you're already some kind of enlightened being, you can just like watch your thoughts go by in real time and be like, well, I'm gonna let that go. Bye problems. Like, that's not how things work for me, because as soon as I start to try not to think about something and let it go, it gets all my attention and then it turns into this like boiling heap of awfulness. And so I had to really just take that to my therapist. I was like, okay, I don't know how to like let go. And she's like, that's not a real thing. And I was like, thank you. It makes me feel a lot better because like it makes you almost honestly like kind of shame yourself because you're like, why can't I let this go? That's kind of the whole point of the reason that this thing exists, is kind of this like negative, crappy black hole in your brain, is because up till now, you haven't really been able to let it go. And it's because it's really hard to let stuff go sometimes when it's anchored in your past emotions. I mean, that's just kind of how we work. We have all of these sort of like instincts built into us because we are Homo sapiens, and we've been using all of these genetic traits to be able to survive for thousands of years, and now in current day, they don't serve us quite as well as they used to because we have built our lives in a way that's a lot safer, and so a lot of them tend to be self-protection mechanisms for beings that were only just trying to survive, and we're instead trying to apply them to complex relationships and everyday kind of mundane tasks and things like that. And so we get thrown into a tailspin by these things really easily. So when I brought this to my therapist, she really helped me clarify this. She said the best thing ever. She goes, "You have to feel your feelings." And I was like, God, why are therapists so full of these incredible turns of phrase, like, you have to feel your feelings? She said, in order to let go, you do still have to let the feelings happen. So for example, when you're sitting there on a date and the person says something that reminds you of your ex and you start tail spinning, instead of letting the situation take the wheel and just let you keep feeding negative energy to it and just kind of like feel like you're completely vulnerable to what's happening and not in control, you can feel all of those feelings, but take a step back from them and watch them happen and say, okay. And you don't have to do that in real time. Obviously, if you're at dinner with somebody, like, you don't really have time to do that. Just kind of like, you know, put a pin in it. But when you do decide that you want to address it, the best thing to do is take a step back from those emotions. Don't shame yourself for them. That's a big one. And try to process why those feelings come up the way that they do. And honestly, you don't have to solve for them. You just have to recognize them. Because if you can just feel your feelings, recognize where they're coming from, you've met your monster. You've come face to face with your monster, you shook his hand, you said like, hey buddy, like, I understand you're gonna be here, I understand that I invented you, so like, you kind of have every right to be here, but like, I know what you want, and we're gonna just kind of like have to come to a truce, okay? These are issues that I created, but I also need to forgive myself for them and move on. And suddenly that monster goes from being this like seething, like 10-foot tall thing to just kind of being this thing that's there with you, and then you can just be like, hey, you know, hey buddy, like, yeah, I know you're there, but you don't get to control me. And there is enormous, enormous power in that mental exercise of just taking something, calling it what it is, processing it in a healthy way, and not shaming yourself for it, and not saying this is something about me that I have no control over. When you begin to recognize that these crappy feelings are actually something that you have ultimate control over, it is one of the most empowering feelings in the world. And it is just one more facet of how to kind of use mindfulness to not just exercise positivity in your everyday life and, you know, take things as they come and live in the moment, blah, blah, blah. It is addressing old wounds. And those wounds are going to be there until you face them. Time does not heal your mental and your heart wounds. Actually facing them is what heals the wounds. And once you can be honest with yourself and spend time freeing yourself from these things, you begin to become a better, clearer-headed, more capable human being, and you begin to heal. And that is the ultimate goal here, is because there's nothing wrong with any of us. There's nothing inherently wrong about any of us. It is just a matter of finding what it is in your life that's holding you back, and usually it's these negative mental schemas, these samskaras, these experiences that have taught us to behave a certain way that's no longer practical, that if we can find a healthy way to process them, then we can heal long term. So I encourage you guys to read that book. I'm not done with it yet because it is an incredibly meditative book, like I was saying, so I'm kind of taking it really slow. You have to be in a really, really certain mindset to read it. You can't just ambivalently like read it on, you know, a commute or something like that, because it's too immersive. But I will put a link to the book below if you guys are interested. I know it's also on audiobook. And guys, if you got something out of this, please pass it along and give this video a thumbs up. If you guys want to talk about anything, like if you thought that this was cool for any reason, or you have a request for anything else you'd like me to include in a future video in this series or beyond, leave me a comment below. Let me know. And, or, you know, talk to me on Instagram. I'm always checking my Instagram messages. I love talking to you guys. And if you want to keep hanging out with me on this channel, guys, go ahead and hit the button down below and subscribe. I would love it if you did. I really appreciate you watching. I hope you guys are having a wonderful month so far, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!